There is a war raging inside you. Not the kind fought with weapons, soldiers, or armies, but a silent war, one that tears at your soul with every choice you make. It's not out there in the world, it's in here, within you. Every time you hesitate to do the right thing, every time you seek comfort over growth, every time you cling to an illusion of control while your spirit whispers of freedom, you are standing on the battlefield. The war is between two forces, your ego, the false self that thrives on fear, pride, and survival, and your higher self, the voice of truth, love, and transcendence. This war decides whether you remain chained to mediocrity or rise into greatness. Whether you live a life that slowly suffocates you, or one that awakens you to power, clarity, and meaning. Most people never realize this war exists. They believe the voice of the ego is who they are. They live as slaves to their impulses, their insecurities, and their need for validation. But if you're here, listening, something inside you already suspects there's more, that there's another part of you waiting to emerge, a self beyond the noise. And this is where your journey begins. Imagine for a moment that you're walking through life wearing a mask. You've worn it for so long that you've forgotten what your real face looks like. This mask smiles when it's supposed to, nods when it's expected, and hides every wound and insecurity you carry. That mask is your ego. The ego isn't your enemy in the traditional sense, it's your survival mechanism. It was built to protect you from rejection, from humiliation, from pain. It whispers, "Stay safe. Stay small. Don't risk too much. Don't let them see the real you." But here's the tragedy: what was designed to protect you has now become your prison. Think about it. The ego thrives on comparison. You measure yourself against others constantly. Who's richer, stronger, better looking, more successful? The ego feeds on external validation. It craves recognition, praise, and attention. Without these, it feels empty, worthless, fragile. And so you chase endlessly, chasing approval, chasing status, chasing material possessions. Yet the more you chase, the more the ego grows, and the further you drift from the still, quiet presence of your higher self. The higher self doesn't chase, it knows. It doesn't compare, it simply is. But the ego hates silence. It fills your mind with noise, doubts, fears, criticisms, judgments. It convinces you that you are what you own, what people think of you, or what you've achieved. This is the first battle in the silent war, the battle of identity. Do you live as the mask, or do you dare to remove it? Because here's the truth: the mask is heavy. It exhausts you. And deep down you know it. There are moments, brief, fleeting, when you feel the whisper of your higher self. When you're in nature, or in stillness, or in the middle of creating something beautiful. In those moments you feel free. Unburdened. True. But the ego always pulls you back. It cannot allow you to stay in that freedom, because if you truly awakened, the ego would dissolve. And that, right there, is why the silent war is relentless. The ego clings for its survival, while the higher self patiently waits for your return. The question is, which one are you feeding? Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a voice inside you, not loud, not commanding, but gentle, steady, and timeless. A voice that doesn't shout, but whispers. That voice is your higher self. Unlike the ego, the higher self isn't concerned with appearances. It doesn't care about how many likes you get, how much money you make, or how others perceive you. It speaks from a deeper realm, one that transcends fear and competition. The higher self is the part of you that knows you are more than your failures and greater than your victories. It's the presence that arises when you silence the chaos of the mind. It's the clarity you feel in moments of deep meditation, or when you're staring at the stars and suddenly remember how vast the universe is. You've heard this voice before. It's the intuition that nudged you when you were about to make a choice that didn't align with your truth. It's the inner strength that pushed you through suffering when your ego wanted to quit. It's the compassion that rose in you when your pride wanted to strike back. But here's the problem: this voice is subtle, while the ego is loud. The ego shouts because it thrives on fear, fear of rejection, fear of scarcity, fear of being nothing. The higher self, however, doesn't argue. It waits. It trusts that eventually you will listen. This is why so many people miss it. They're too distracted, too busy running from one desire to the next, too consumed by the noise of the world to hear the stillness inside. But the higher self is always there. It's not something you have to build or achieve, it's who you already are beneath the layers of fear and conditioning. The work is not to create it, but to uncover it. Think of it like a seed buried deep within the soil of your being. The seed doesn't scream to grow. It simply waits for the conditions to be right. If you water it with awareness, if you give it the light of stillness, it will naturally rise. But if you keep feeding the weeds of ego, the seed remains buried, unseen, forgotten. And yet, even if forgotten, it never dies. That's the miracle of the higher self. It cannot be destroyed. No matter how far you wander, no matter how much the ego dominates, your higher self remains untouched, waiting for your return. The real war, then, isn't about annihilating the ego. It's about remembering who you truly are. Because the moment you recognize the higher self, the ego begins to lose its grip. But here's the question most avoid: what happens when you actually start listening to that inner voice? It will challenge you. It will demand that you let go of the masks, the illusions, and the comfortable lies you've built your life upon. And this is where the battle deepens. Because following the higher self means stepping into the unknown. And the ego will do everything in its power to keep you from that leap. The ego is clever. It knows it cannot defeat the higher self directly, because the higher self is not bound by fear, pride, or desire. So instead, the ego fights in silence. It fights with illusions, with tricks, with weapons designed to keep you asleep. And these weapons are subtle, which is why they are so dangerous. The first weapon is fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of rejection. Every time you've hesitated to take a step forward because, what if I'm not good enough? That was the ego's sword cutting you down. Fear shrinks you. Fear convinces you that safety is better than growth, that comfort is better than risk. The second weapon is desire. Not true desire rooted in purpose, but cravings, addictions, and endless chasing. The ego whispers, if only you get that car, that house, that status, that person, then you'll be complete. But the moment you grasp it, the emptiness returns. So you chase again. The ego keeps you trapped in an endless loop of wanting, always dangling the illusion of happiness just out of reach. The third weapon is comparison. The ego feeds by measuring you against others. It convinces you that your worth depends on how you stack up. If someone rises above you, you feel inferior. If you rise above them, you feel superior. Either way, you are chained. Because in comparison, there is no freedom, only the ego's endless hunger for validation. The fourth weapon is pride. Pride is the armor the ego wears to protect its fragile core. It blinds you to your flaws, hardens you against growth, and makes you defend illusions instead of facing truth. Pride says, I already know enough. I don't need to change. I don't need help. And in that moment, the ego wins because growth dies where pride lives. The final weapon is distraction. The ego knows that silence is dangerous, because in silence, you might hear the higher self. So it keeps you busy. Scrolling, consuming, running, talking, doing anything but sitting with yourself. Have you noticed how uncomfortable stillness feels? That's the ego squirming, terrified that if you stop moving, you might actually see it for what it is. These are the weapons the ego uses to keep you in chains. And the cruelest part? The ego doesn't look like your enemy. It feels like you. When fear rises, when pride swells, when desire pulls, you believe it's your own voice. But it's not. It's the mask speaking, not the soul. And until you learn to recognize these weapons for what they are, you will always be outmaneuvered in the silent war. But once you see them, once you name them, they begin to lose their power. Because awareness is the first counterattack. The question now becomes, how do you fight back? The ego fights with fear, pride, comparison, and distraction. But the higher self is not defenseless. Its weapons are not loud or aggressive, they are subtle, but they cut deeper than any illusion the ego can create. The first weapon of the higher self is awareness. When you step back and simply observe your thoughts, your emotions, and your reactions, you begin to see that you are not them. You are the one watching. This is the beginning of liberation. Fear loses its grip when you see it for what it is, a shadow, not a truth. Desire weakens when you recognize it as a craving of the ego, not the hunger of the soul. Awareness is light, and the ego cannot survive in full light. The second weapon is truth. The higher self does not bend reality to make you comfortable. It speaks with clarity, even when it hurts. It tells you when you're lying to yourself, when you're clinging to masks, when you're living small. And though the truth stings, it cleanses. Every time you choose truth over illusion, the ego loses a battle. The third weapon is silence. The ego thrives in noise, but the higher self thrives in stillness. In meditation, in solitude, in those rare moments when you disconnect from the world's constant chatter, you begin to hear the whisper within. The silence is not empty, it is full of guidance. And the more you enter it, the more you realize the higher self has been speaking all along. The fourth weapon is detachment. Where the ego clings, the higher self releases. The ego says, "I am what I own, I am what they think of me, I am my past, I am my success." The higher self knows, "I am none of those things. I am the awareness behind them." Detachment doesn't mean apathy, it means freedom. It means you can enjoy things without being enslaved by them. The fifth and final weapon is love. Not the shallow love that the ego seeks, validation, attention, possession, but the deep, boundless love of the higher self. This is the love that arises when you see yourself and others as souls, not masks. The ego divides, you versus me, success versus failure, worthy versus unworthy. The higher self unites. And in that unity, the ego crumbles. These are the weapons of your higher self: awareness, truth, silence, detachment, and love. They are not easy to wield, because they demand discipline, vulnerability, and courage. But every time you practice them, you grow stronger. The ego will resist. It will strike harder. It will scream louder. But once you've tasted the clarity of the higher self, the ego's tricks no longer satisfy you. And this is when the war turns in your favor. But here's the critical truth: knowing about these weapons is not enough. You must train with them. You must sharpen them daily. Because if you do not, the ego will reclaim the battlefield. The next chapter is about that training, the inner practices that transform the silent war into victory. Every warrior needs discipline. You cannot expect to win the silent war by inspiration alone. The ego is relentless, it attacks daily, and so your training must also be daily. The higher self isn't awakened through a single moment of clarity, it is forged in consistent practice. The first training is self-observation. Throughout your day, begin watching yourself. Notice when fear grips you. Notice when comparison creeps in. Notice when pride makes you defensive. Don't judge yourself, just notice. Every act of awareness is like stepping out of the ego's grip. You stop being the pawn, and you become the observer of the game. The second training is solitude. Find moments to step away from the noise. No phone, no distractions, no constant stream of voices. Just you alone. At first, this feels unbearable. The ego panics in silence. It craves distraction. But if you stay with it, you will hear something beneath the panic, the quiet voice of your higher self. Solitude is where the soul strengthens. The third training is discipline of the body. Why the body? Because the ego often hides there, in cravings, addictions, and laziness. When you push your body beyond comfort, whether through exercise, fasting, or simply denying impulses, you prove to yourself that the ego is not in control. Discipline over the body strengthens discipline over the mind. The fourth training is honesty. The ego thrives on lies. Lies you tell others, lies you tell yourself. But the higher self can only live in truth. Begin with small acts of radical honesty. Admit when you're wrong, speak your real thoughts, stop pretending. It is painful at first, because masks have become second nature. But with each act of honesty, the mask cracks. The fifth training is service. The ego is obsessed with self, my gain, my success, my image. Service shatters this illusion. When you help others, not for recognition but from genuine compassion, you align with the higher self. You realize you are not separate, you are connected. Service is the discipline of expanding beyond yourself. The sixth training is daily reflection. At the end of each day, pause. Look back. Where did the ego win today? Where did the higher self win? Write it down. Reflection sharpens awareness. And awareness sharpens choice. Slowly, you begin to see patterns, and in seeing them, you gain control over them. This is the training of the silent warrior: observation, solitude, discipline, honesty, service, reflection. These are not glamorous practices. They don't bring instant glory. But practiced over time, they make you unshakable. Because the silent war is not about defeating the ego once and for all, it is about mastering yourself every single day. And as you strengthen, something remarkable begins to happen. The war shifts. It no longer feels like endless conflict. It begins to feel like transformation. But transformation requires one final ingredient. Something that both terrifies and liberates: surrender. Up until now, the battle has felt like resistance. You resist fear, you resist pride, you resist distraction. But here's the paradox of the silent war. The ultimate victory does not come through resistance. It comes through surrender. Not the surrender of weakness, but the surrender of illusion. The ego thrives on control. It wants to manage every outcome, to protect every image, to secure every future. It clings desperately to the idea. I am this body. I am this name. I am this story. And as long as you hold on to that, the ego survives. But the higher self whispers, you are not the story. You are not the mask. You are not even the voice in your head. You are the awareness that watches it all. To awaken to this truth, you must surrender the false self. You must let die the parts of you that were never real. This is why spiritual awakenings often feel like death. The death of your old identity, the death of your illusions, the death of your ego's false throne. And the ego will resist with everything it has, because to the ego, surrender feels like annihilation. And in a way it is. But here's the truth, when the false self dies, you do not lose yourself, you finally meet yourself. The self that does not need validation, that does not fear rejection, that does not cling to possessions or titles. The self that is free. Surrender means letting go of the need to be seen a certain way. Letting go of the endless chase for more. Letting go of the lie that you are separate, small, unworthy. It means trusting life, trusting the deeper current that carries you, instead of trying to control every wave. This surrender is terrifying at first. The ego screams, if I let go, I will disappear. If I stop controlling, I will lose everything. But when you finally release, you realize the opposite is true. You don't disappear, you expand. You don't lose, you gain. You don't fall into nothingness, you awaken into everything. This is the secret the ego never wants you to discover. Surrender is freedom. And in that freedom, the war quiets. Not because the ego is destroyed, it will always whisper, always try to pull you back. But because you no longer mistake it for yourself. You see it for what it is, a mask. And masks cannot bind you once you know the face beneath. Victory in the silent war is not about destroying the ego, it is about rising above it. And once you do, life itself changes. You no longer live from fear, but from clarity. You no longer chase endlessly, but move with purpose. You no longer live asleep, but awake. That awakening is the true prize of the silent war. Now that you've seen the battlefield, the weapons, the training, and the surrender, the question remains, how do you live as the higher self in the chaos of everyday life? The truth is, it's not about perfection. The ego will always whisper, always tempt, always try to pull you back into masks and illusions. But living as the higher self means you no longer identify with those whispers. You hear them, but you don't obey them. You watch them, but you don't become them. It means walking into the world with awareness. Every time you feel fear, you pause and ask, is this my ego or my truth? Every time comparison rises, you remind yourself, no one can take from me what I already am. Every time pride swells, you breathe and remember, I am not my mask, I am the awareness behind it. Living as the higher self is not about escaping the world. It's about moving through the world differently. You still work, create, struggle, and build, but you are no longer enslaved by outcomes. You are no longer chasing shadows. You are no longer asleep. And in that freedom, a new life opens. You begin to create not from fear, but from inspiration. You begin to love not for validation, but for connection. You begin to walk not with anxiety, but with trust. This is what it means to win the silent war, not by defeating the ego, but by transcending it.